Hello and welcome. My name's Angie Holden and I'm the blogger behind The Country Chic Cottage. Today we're going to talk about making reusable stencils with your Cricut machine. Now this video is sponsored by Testors, however all projects and opinions are my own. I will be using Testors acrylic craft paint. They're matte craft paint, which I really love, and I'm going to be using it in two different colors that I like. So I'm going to use the fuchsia and the turquoise. However, they have a wide variety of color options. So if you're looking for craft paint, definitely pick that up. And you can use it with this tutorial and make yourself a reusable stencil for painting. Now with the reusable stencil, I am going to make some photo blocks. However, this tutorial can be used to make reusable stencils of all sizes for different projects. So I'm going to use some clear stencil film that we're going to be cutting on our Cricut machine. I'm going to use 12 by 12 sheets. I'm not sure, I'm sure they make it in larger sheets, but those are the sheets I keep on hand for my stencils. And then we're going to cut a variety of small stencils in my case because my project is small, but you could cut large stencils as well. And then you can clean these after use, and I could use these over and over and over again. So if you've ever wanted to make your own stencils for a project you have in mind, this video is definitely for you. So now let's take a look at the supplies we're going to use for this project. The supplies you're going to need are as follows. So I'm going to use wood blocks as my example project. Then of course you're going to need some paint, and I'm using Testors Craft matte paint, and I chose fuchsia and turquoise. There are a wide variety of colors that you can choose from for this. Then I'm going to use some small clothespins for the top of these to make them photo holders. Then we're going to use some paintbrushes, maybe a Pouncer brush to do the stenciling, and then you will need stencil film. So these are clear blank stencil sheets, and they are a 12 by 12 size to get the most out of them when I'm cutting with my Cricut machine. So these are like an acetate-like sheet, and you can cut them with any Cricut. You might also want some spray adhesive. I recommend something that says it's for stencil or says it's repositionable in order to get the best paint quality when you use the stencils on your surface. So you might want that as well. And then of course we're going to use a Cricut machine to cut these. Paint each block on all sides with 1 to 2 coats of the paint. So I would paint 1 coat, then allow that to dry, and then paint a second coat. I did do 2 coats on the blocks that I'm going to be using for my stenciling before I started the stenciling process. The other thing I would recommend is waiting 24 hours for the paint on these to dry completely before you start the process of stenciling. That will help you tremendously with success with your stencil and your stencil not pulling off the paint that you've already put onto the blocks. I do have this as a free file, and I will link to that in the description below this video. I went ahead and imported the file. I synced everything to the same color, and I went ahead and resized it to the size I want for my blocks. Now I do want to make, because I'm making blocks with this design, I want each of these to be a separate stencil. So for this, we are going to have to break it up because it is one piece right now, whereas the hearts are fine. I'm going to go ahead and use contour to break it into 3 different pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it twice. And for each one of these, I am going to do contour. And then for the first one, for example, I'll just leave 1M, and I'll just continue on with that for each of these letters. So now we have each letter separate as well as the heart separate. What I'm going to do is make 5 different stencils. So you could make 1 stencil with all of these cut out of 1 single stencil, but I want to make 5 different stencils. So I am going to draw a square, and I'm going to make it 3.75 by 3.75. I think that will work well. Then I can take my heart, put it over my square, pick both objects, align, center, and then click attach. And then I will change that back to the pink. And so now you can see I have a pink square with a heart cut out of the center. Now let's repeat that for each of the other designs. So actually the hearts are the exact same size, so I'm just going to duplicate this. So I will have 2 of those. Then we'll draw another square. Just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to make these all the same size. Center that up and attach. Then be sure to change it back so it is the same material color. Again, the M's are exactly the same, so I could delete this M off and just make 2 of these. Now these stencils are reusable, so we would not necessarily have to make 2 of these, but I do want to paint all of my blocks at the same time, and all these, the size I'm making them, are going to fit on 1 stencil sheet, so it should be fine. So let's make 1 more. For this one, we need to do a little something different. So for the hearts and for the M, we just have a piece cut out of the center of a square, and we will have a stencil. For this version with the O, I chose this design sort of on purpose because we will have a center to this letter. If you don't choose a stencil font, which I have not in this case, you would need to make something they call bridges in order to keep the center in place. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this O. We can bring the O up here, and so let's take a shape. Let's just do a square, and I'm actually going to do it all the way across the center of this O. So I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to make it fairly thin. You can make it as thin or as thick as you would like, and we're going to kind of put it over the center of this O. Let's pick both of these, align, center it up just to make sure everything is covered. So let's do subtract. So that should subtract, as long as we have the front piece in the front, it should subtract it out of the O. So we'll click subtract, and you can see that that's exactly what we want. So we have those bridges located there with the O. So now let's pick the O and the larger square that we created, and then we will center those up. Again, we will do attach just like the other ones, and then change it to pink. And now you can see that it is going to cut out these 2 pieces out of my square. That is going to give me the center of my letter. However, I am going to have these 2 bridges, something like a stencil font would be, and I would need to fill those in if I don't want those, which I don't want those on my project, so I am going to show you how to kind of fill those in, and you would need to fill those in by hand. So you would want to make the bridges, in this case, as thin as you can possibly get them and still have a stencil that works. So you don't want the stencil to be too flimsy where you would break it or you wouldn't get the center of the letter in location. So you kind of have to find a medium where there is enough there to not make it flimsy, but it's small enough that you can kind of paint it in by hand. So now we have all of our stencils created. So let's go ahead and click make it and see what this is going to look like. I'm going to do on the mat and click confirm. And you can see that all of my stencils in this case fit on 1 sheet of stencil film. So I am going to go ahead and make all 5 of these. Again, these are reusable, so I could just make 1 of the heart and 1 of the M, but I just kind of want to make all of mine at once, paint all my blocks at once, and then remove those. So now we'll click continue. I'm using my Arrow 2, so I have my dial set to custom. We're going to browse on materials, and we're going to type stencil into the search bar. So you'll see a few different things. The stencil vinyl and the flexible stencil film are both products made by Cricut. So we do want to pick this stencil film here. You might also try an acetate setting, that might also work. It's just going to depend on the brand of stencil film that you purchase. So we're going to try the stencil film setting, and now let's take a look at how to cut this material. The material I'm using comes with a protective sheet on both sides. I go ahead and remove that from both sides before cutting. And it is just a clear protective sheet. The material itself should be like super clear, so you can sort of tell if it has a protective film, and you might test one of your sheets just to make sure. Then we're gonna add this to a light grip mat. And then you just wanna make sure it's pressed down really well. I like to use a brayer for that. Then I just have the fine point blade installed in my machine. I'm gonna go ahead and load this material and just press go to cut. I do find that each brand of this film is a bit different, so I always check my cuts before I unload it. So this one is almost through, but a few of the areas are not. So I'm just going to sort of press it down here, and I'm going to press the C button on my machine to cut one more pass over the top. Then Once it's done that additional pass, we'll just check everything. Now everything looks cut through, so we're just gonna go ahead and remove it from the machine. I like to just turn my mat over, peel it back, and then just be careful. So this material is sturdy, yes, but you could actually rip it. So we're just gonna carefully remove these from the mat, and now we have all these individual stencils ready for the project. So now let's take a look at how to use these. And then again, with something like the O here, we'll just remove these pieces, and we have the bridges holding that center in. So now let's take a look at how to use these stencils on the project. If you want to use an adhesive spray on your stencils, I suggest adding into a box, going outside, and you do want to spray the back of the stencil very, very lightly. Again, a repositionable adhesive spray or one that says for stencils. And I'm just gonna lightly go over these. And this will just help keep them in place on the blocks. So I'm just going to allow these to dry with that light coat of adhesive on them. If you sprayed the stencils, they should feel tacky, not wet. Then you're ready to paint. So the first thing we're going to do is choose a smooth side of the block. Now, if your wood was not smooth before you started, I would suggest sanding at the very beginning before you even start painting. Then we're going to add this first stencil. And we're just going to locate it onto the block where we want it. And then because we have that adhesive, we should just be able to sort of press it down. Now, if you have a larger piece or you did not use the adhesive, you would probably need to use some painter's tape at this point to hold everything into place. Now the next thing we're going to do is to add a coat of the fuchsia paint or the same color paint, so it seeps under the stencil and not the paint we want to stencil with. So I'm going to get some of the pink paint, and I'm going to add a light coat. Now, if you have a project where the stencil is larger, you could just go over the edges with this light coat. The stencil is smaller, so it's obviously reaching the entire project, but just go over the entire thing, and that should hopefully seal up any gaps that you have in the stencil where it's not adhered. And now I'm just going to let that dry before we add the next coat. And while this dries, I'm going to go ahead and repeat this same process on my other blocks with my other stencils, because remember, I made enough for every block. So now, as you can see, I've repeated the process with all of the blocks. So I went ahead and added the stencil with the adhesive onto each one, pressed it down well, added one light coat of the same color as the block to the top. Now I'm going to allow these to dry completely before doing the actual stencil portion of the project. Then once this is dry and ready, the best thing to do is dip your paintbrush in and get as little on there as possible. And then go from the outside in. So start on the outside, work your way to the inside, all the way around. It'll be harder to do for these thinner stencils, but try to start on the outside and work your way to the inside. Basically, you don't want to push the paint under the stencil, so pushing from the outside to the inside is a better strategy. And I do several light coats, so there's one light coat. I would allow that to dry and do another light coat. That gives me the best results when using this type of stencil. I did like 4 or 5 light coats over each of these, and then you can peel and remove the stencil. It should peel fairly easily, and then my block looks great, and I can go ahead and remove the paint as well as the adhesive from the stencil and reuse this. So just a household cleaner on the front usually works really well for the paint, and then something like Goo Gone on the back for the adhesive works the best. So you can clean these up, reuse them as many times as you would like. So now let's take a look at if you have any mistakes, how to touch those up, as well as how to fix the bridges in the O. If you have any bleeding, say under this M, just right on this edge here, there's just a slight mistake. You can just use some of the paint of the other color and sort of fill that in with a small brush. And just cover over the top of any errors. and then just let everything dry. Then for things like the bridges, and actually there is a mistake on the O, there was some bleeding on it as well. I like to fill them in. So I like to go back to my bridges and fill them in. And you might have to do, you know, I did 4 to 5 coats on the stencil itself. You might have to do that on the bridges. So I would paint the bridge here, allow it to dry, and then paint it again. And then for this, I'm probably going to fix the bridge first, and then come back where it was bleeding under the stencil and fix that afterwards. I think that'll work best. So that's how you fix the bridges that you might have to put in your stencil and make it look like you did not have to use those at all. So I'll just allow that to dry and keep adding coats on top of those bridged areas. Here are these blocks after I touched them up and the paint is dried, and I must say I am super impressed with the stenciling. So now for these blocks, I'm going to turn them into photo holders. Remember, this idea can be used for any project. So the idea of making a reusable stencil can be used for projects big or small with your Cricut machine. But let's turn these blocks into photo holders for a great gift for mom. To turn these into photo holders, you could do it a variety of ways. So you could cut with a saw a slit in the top where you would put the photo down inside. You could drill a hole in the center of this, add a wire to that hole, bring the wire up, curl it around, put the picture in that curled area. I sort of like a clothespin on the back. So the front is where we stenciled. Flip it over to the back and add the clothespin with the opening to the top. So you're gonna be able to open this, add in the photo, and close it back up. So I like these like medium-sized clothespins because they'll kind of be hidden from view once these are set, like on a desk or something. And you could use any glue to secure this. I'm just going to use hot glue for this video. Definitely use any glue that you like. And we'll put it about in the center. And then just hold it down until that glue cools. And I'm going to repeat for all of these blocks. And then once each block is done, you can just squeeze that clothespin, add in your photo. Then you can display these anywhere with your photo added to the back. So I think this is a cute idea, and you can make a single one or a series that spells a word out like this. Either way, and I printed 4x6 photos, but other size, even smaller photos would work for this. So now I have my cute photo blocks, and I could give these as a gift. So these do make a great gift idea, in my opinion. Pretty inexpensive, easy to make. If you make these reusable stencils, you have mom, you know, your mother-in-law, different people that you want to give these to, you can make several versions of this. The hearts would be the same stencil no matter what words you use, so that's good as well. Just remember those bridges when you are making your stencils. That is very important when you're making stencils. Be sure to include a bridge for any internal pieces. And then I showed you how to kind of cover up that you use the bridge there at the end so no one is the wiser. With the addition of the bridges, that means you can use any file, any fonts with the stencil material that I showed. So I do have the file for the mom blocks. However, you could use your own font. You could use your own SVG file. Just remember to add those bridges before you cut. That way you don't lose the centers from your stencil material. And then, once you have your stencil, of course, grab your Testors craft paint to do your painting. So this is a really great paint. Again, I did about 2 coats on the blocks themselves. And then I applied the stencil, added another coat of the same color, and then I did probably like 4 coats over the letter itself because I did very light coats, which is important when stenciling. And I absolutely love the matte finish that this paint gives my projects. If you don't like that, you could definitely spray coat over the top of these with, say, a gloss finish spray top coat, and your finished project would have a glossy top coat. I don't add anything to the top of these, just personally. I don't feel like they need anything for indoor use. I think just the paint is fine. However, if you're going to make a project for outside using a stencil, I would definitely use some kind of sealer over the paint. And again, if you wanted like a different finish to the project rather than matte, you could add a sealer over the top, even for indoor use. Or if it was going to be a project that required heavy use. So if I was going to stencil a project and say it was going to be in my bathroom or my kitchen, going to be handled a lot, then I definitely would put a sealer over the paint, over that stencil design, just to make sure that it lasts a really long time. These photo blocks, of course, would not be used that often. No one's going to be touching them. They're going to be like display purposes only. A sealer probably would not be needed. So hopefully that helps you and teaches you how to make reusable stencils with your Cricut machine. If it does, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions about making stencils, drop down in the comment section, ask away. And if you haven't already, head on over to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. We have videos just like this one every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss any of those. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.